My parents only came back to me because of the inheritance. That's how I reacted. Black manipulation for money.
My parents abandoned me after the divorce. Years later, I inherited $1 million from my grandfather, and they suddenly reappeared in my life, demanding money for my stepbrothers and to pay off my father's debts. My family left me when I was about 12 years old. My parents divorced when I was 11. It came as a surprise to me, because it seemed like everything was fine with them. One day, the two of them sat me down in front of them and told me they were getting a divorce. I thought it was a joke because I had completely different ideas about divorce. I have heard from friends that it is accompanied by at least a year of quarrels and shouting. In my case, it was a silent breakup. They said they fell in love with other people. Mum was moving in with her new boyfriend, and Dad's new sweetheart was moving into our house. They agreed on joint custody, as they were going to live only 3 kilometers from each other, and I had to move from one parent to another once a week. I didn't know what to say, or rather, no one gave me the right to vote. My family was crumbling, and I could only sit and cry. My parents assured me that I would remain their top priority. They promised everything, the latest video games, travel, any gifts, but I didn't need any of that. I just wanted to live with them as a family. It was too painful to see my mother packing up and leaving the house, and my father's new woman unloading her things from the truck and arranging my parents' bedroom for herself. Mum and Dad separated peacefully. My father's new wife had twins almost my age, and they treated me with hostility, just as I treated them. Mom's boyfriend had a daughter from his first marriage, but she lived with her mother. I thought I'd spend more time with my mum, but soon after moving in, she got pregnant by her boyfriend, and things got complicated. I felt that I was not welcome there. Mom's husband clearly felt uncomfortable in my presence. They were always affectionate to each other in front of me, and it was annoying. It was the same at my father's house. My stepmother and her sons didn't accept me, so I started staying with my father's sister aunt, who was also my godmother, more and more often. She was 10 years older than Dad. I lived alone, but sometimes I visited my aunt. After a year of rushing between 3 houses, I finally moved in with her. It took more than 3 months for my parents to notice that I was no longer with them. Mum thought I was at Dad's, and Dad thought I was at Mum's. They didn't even bother to check where I was, because they were too busy with their new families and just forgot about me. My aunt has become a real salvation for me. She made me feel that I was loved and that someone needed me. We went to the movies and restaurants together, went on vacation in the summer, and visited my grandfather on his farm. She was fun to live with. At first, my father sent money to my aunt for my maintenance, but over time he began to do this less and less. Sometimes his aunt would remind him, and sometimes she would just wave her hand. It was awkward for me to sit on her neck, so I started working for her and earning a living. My aunt had a plant nursery, and I helped there after school. I also did my homework, took out the trash, and ran grocery shopping. I loved living with her. Meanwhile, my parents had completely forgotten about my existence. They didn't even wish me a happy birthday, only if my aunt reminded them. Then they called and said they loved me very much. Sometimes I heard my aunt calling them to tell them that I was sick, but they never came to visit me. None of them even came to my graduation. Only my aunt was there to support me. When she called her parents and scolded them for their indifference, they suddenly remembered about me and called with apologies. But I already held a grudge against them and stopped answering the phone. Eventually, they stopped trying to contact me altogether. Now it was more convenient for them to say that I had become rude and did not want to communicate myself. I told them, if you want to play blame shifting, you're welcome, but I don't care anymore. I don't want you in my life. After school, I went to university and moved out of my aunt's house, but I still visit her every few months. I always come to her birthdays and holidays because over the years we have become very close. I am currently in my final year of university. My paternal grandfather died 3 months ago. It was a difficult moment for both me and my aunt because we were both closest to him. My father and his brothers hardly visited my grandfather, but the most ironic thing was that they came to the funeral and then we all gathered at the lawyer's office to get acquainted with the will. Unfortunately, Grandpa left everything to his aunt, 60 hectares of land, a house, and $1 million. He decided to donate the remaining money to charity. It was harsh, but knowing his story, everything made sense. Grandpa was ill for a long time and really wanted to see his sons. Despite his aunt's request to visit him, none of them came. In the last days of his life, his aunt moved in with him to take care of him. By that time, I had already left to study at the university. After my aunt inherited all his possessions, she called me home and she said she would give me the $1 million that her grandfather had left her. Words cannot express how happy I was, not only because of the money, although I admit because of them too, but because I realized how much she cared about me all these years. I often told her about my dream to open my own company and hire employees. She gave me the money and told me to use it to make this dream come true. I just hugged her and cried. If it wasn't for her, my life might have turned out very differently. Less than a day later, this news reached my parents, and bam, suddenly, they started showering me with their unconditional love. They called me and asked how I was doing. I immediately told them to stay away from me. I don't want to see you. My dad showed up at my dorm last week. Of course, he got the address from my aunt. I'm sure my parents don't even know which university I study at. He said he was proud that I was graduating this year, and after a list of compliments, he asked why I didn't visit him. I looked at him and asked, "When was the last time you called me?" He paused, and then shrugging his shoulders. "Oh, are you still mad at us because of the divorce? Come on, it's time to move on. We both love you. Your mother misses you too. Let me take you home. Let's all have dinner together." I replied, "Fuck off. The only family I have is my aunt. You both left me a long time ago, so stop pretending to be loving parents. I know why you're here. You want money, right?" The father remained silent and then said that he had no selfish motives other than love. He came to apologize and make up. He said that he had heard about my graduation and wanted to make sure that I would invite them. I hated even talking to him, so I just turned around and left, saying I had a date. On the same day, I received a voice message from my mom. She said she was waiting for an invitation to my graduation. She said that she and my father had not been able to graduate from university and had always dreamed that I would get a higher education. Now she is very glad that I succeeded. The thing is, I don't want to see them at my graduation. I told my aunt about this, and she said that the decision was up to me, but advised me to make peace with my parents. I do not know what to do. I'm also not sure if they want to establish a relationship for me or just for the money. So I suggest you pause this video right now and write in the comments what you would recommend to the author. And we're moving on to the first update. Hi, sorry for the late update. I've been very busy, but I have good news. I graduated from university and got a job. I'll start by answering the most popular questions in the comments. The first question was about my aunt. People asked her what kind of family she had and how she had been able to support me for so many years. I think I already wrote in the first post that my aunt is 10 years older than my father. When I moved in with her, she was already over 50. She lived alone. Her husband died in an accident when I was very young, about 2 years old. She has a daughter who graduated from a medical university. Now she is a cardiologist and lives in the UK. After her husband's death, my aunt no longer dated men. Her daughter and I tried to arrange a date for her, but she categorically refused. She said she loved her plants and was happy to take care of them. Some of you wrote that I treated my parents too harshly because they had the right to separate and create new families. You're right, they really had every right to do that. But nothing justifies forgetting about your own child. When a new family appears in your life, it is important not to forget about those who were there before. However, that's exactly what my parents did. They just stopped noticing me. At first, we had a set schedule. 1 week, I lived with my father, the other with my mother. But over time, I started hearing phrases like, "Oh, it's my turn to take him again." And then they always made plans without me. They organized dinners with friends or trips only for those days when I was away. They could even say in front of me, "Oh, that guy's here again. Let's go out next week." How would you feel if your parents behaved like that? I've already told you about my mother. A few months after moving in with her boyfriend, she became pregnant. They weren't shy about showing affection in front of me, and it was just unpleasant. Once they took me on a 2-day trip, but all the time they forced me to sit in my room while they sunbathed on the beach. And when we were in the room, they told me to sit on the balcony. I was a kid, but I knew exactly what was going on. I was 11 years old, and I could hear them perfectly. And this man wasn't even my father. How could I continue to visit them after that? After that incident, I did not visit my mother again. Dad was a little better. Sometimes he tried to include me in his plans, but his stepsons threw tantrums, and he said, "Okay, maybe we'll go fishing next time." But the next time never came, because the next week I had to go to my mother. I soon realized that my parents had some kind of unspoken agreement. When they wanted to get rid of me, they just said, "Let's do it next time," and then I became the other's problem. Once, my father did take me on a family trip, but it was a terrible experience. From the very first day, his wife and her sons constantly distracted him, and I felt completely superfluous. Even when they were taking family photos, I was asked to take pictures of them. As a result, I only had 4 pictures left during the entire trip, 3 where I was alone and 1 with my father. I hope now those who said I was too hard on my parents understand why I treat them the way I do. As for the current situation, as I said before, my parents want to come back into my life. They said they wanted to go to my graduation and that they were proud of me. I replied, "I don't want to see you there. Where were you when I graduated from high school? Were you busy with your new families?" They continued to insist. Then I said, "Come if you want, but I didn't invite you." I thought that as graduation approached, they would try to get in touch again. I even took extra tickets for them in case they showed up uninvited. But they forgot. They didn't even ask when the graduation would be. And in the end, they didn't come. I asked my aunt not to tell them the date of the graduation. It's been almost a month since that moment, but none of them have thought about me. So it was all just an excuse to come back into my life. Update. Almost 2.5 months after my graduation, my mum called. She said that my stepsister graduated from elementary school and now she has been transferred to a private high school. However, they don't have enough money and they want me to help them. I was amazed by her request. When I asked why I should help them, Mum replied, "It's your sister. You should help with her education." She got straight to the point. "We know that your aunt gave you $1 million from her inheritance." I calmly replied, "Yes, I did. Your sister needs you. This is your chance to prove yourself as an older brother." I stopped her. "Are you crazy? I've never even seen this sister. Where were you when I needed my mum? When I was sick, you weren't around." She began to cry. "Well, what can I say? You're still stuck in the past. I thought you have a lot of money. What are you going to do with it? What could be better than helping your sister get an education at a private school?" I wanted to say a lot of things, but I restrained myself. I have plans for this money. I can't spend a dime on something else.
She hung up the phone. I didn't even ask how they got my number. It turned out later that my father had given it to them. His problem, not mine. For several months, my father did not pay the mortgage. When the bank started looking for him, he asked them to contact me because he didn't have the money. To be honest, I panicked at first. I didn't know how this process worked, and I was afraid that since I was his son, I might be legally obligated to pay his debt. Fortunately, I didn't succumb to the pressure. Instead of calling my father right away, I called a friend who was studying to become a lawyer. He wasn't a real lawyer yet, but he was already in his final year and knew a lot about the law. He calmed me down. No, you don't have to pay. But then why is the bank calling me? Recoverers may try to get money from anyone who agrees to pay for the debtor, but you can just refuse. After that, I didn't even bother calling my dad. I knew he would beg me to help, but now I realized that it wasn't my responsibility. A week later, the bank called again. The foreclosure agent was quite aggressive. The first time I was scared, but this time he answered harshly. Who gave you the right to talk to me like that? Did I not pay the mortgage?
No.
So watch your tone. I'm not going to pay a dime. Contact the one who is really to blame. Leave me alone. The agent abruptly changed his tone. I'm sorry. And he hung up. I specifically said this so that he would direct all his anger at the real debtor, my father. A couple of hours after talking to the bank, my mother called me. She immediately started screaming. What did you tell the seekers? They got so angry that they threatened to break his bones if he didn't pay. I paused and then calmly replied, I just told them to demand money from the real debtor, not from me. She screamed even louder. Can't you feel a little bit sorry for your father? He's barely making ends meet, and you refuse to help, even though you have so much money. I replied, yes, I have no pity for him, because he didn't have it for me. He gave all his attention to you and your sons. So why don't you help him yourself? I'm sure he would have taken the money from you. She didn't say anything and just hung up. A conversation with my father. That evening, my father called me. He was drunk and crying. I am very sorry for my mistakes. He sobbed. I did wrong because of my stepsons. He said a lot of different things, but the bottom line was that he realized his mistakes and wanted to fix everything. I replied, I don't want to talk about the past, and I certainly don't want you in my life again. He begged me to forgive him. I'm sorry, I said. Remorse doesn't matter to me anymore. I've learned to live without you, and I want it to stay that way. After the conversation, I wondered if I had done the right thing by denying him the money. Of course, it was unpleasant for me that he was under pressure from the collectors, but at the same time, I felt like it could all be staged to play on my emotions. After all, if he had asked for money directly, I would have refused him, just as I refused my mother. Do you think I'm right? Update 3. Thank you for your valuable comments. Many people wrote that it would be easy for me to help my father with a mortgage. To be honest, I thought so myself. But you know what? Parents don't deserve this. None of them. After the last update, I felt so guilty that I almost called my dad to ask how much money he needed. But before that, I got a message from my mom, an invitation to dinner. I'm sorry we couldn't come to your graduation, but we invite you to the restaurant, just the three of us, just like in the good old days, me, dad, and you. I didn't really want to remember the good old days, but I decided to accept the invitation. I'm here. They said all the same things that my father said the other day: apologies, remorse, requests to return to the family. I just nodded, smiled, and played by their rules. I was wondering where this would lead to. And then Mom said, honey, we've been thinking. What are you going to do with the money? I looked at her. She continued, no, I mean, Dad and I can give you some good investment advice. You're still too young to make such decisions on your own. I replied, my aunt helps me with this, so it's fine, thanks. There was a tense pause. Mom spoke again. You know Dad's in trouble because of the mortgage, right? I know, I replied. But Dad, why did you take this loan at all? He lowered his head. College for my stepson. Before I could say anything, Mom continued, it doesn't matter what the loan was for. The question is that Dad is in trouble and we need to help him. Why don't you pay off the mortgage, and his stepson will pay you back later when he finds a job? I just frowned, but she didn't stop. Do you remember when I told you that your stepsister needs to pay for private school? So she will also give you money back when she grows up and starts earning. I grinned and said calmly, can we just have dinner in silence and leave it at that? Mom flushed with anger. You're still that selfish kid who thinks only of himself. I looked at her and nodded. I could start a long lecture about how they betrayed me, how they ignored me when I needed a family, but why? They already know all this very well. They know that I have a student loan, but they still demand to give their money to someone else's mortgage and the private education of a child I don't even know. At the same time, they expect me to continue paying off my debts on my own. Well, I said, getting up from the table, I was right. You came back into my life just for the money, and you know what? You'll have to swallow it. I won't give you a dime. I left my part of the bill on the table and left. What do I think about this story? I think the author did absolutely the right thing. Many commentators said that helping my father with the mortgage is not such a big problem. But let's be honest, he doesn't have to do it. This is his father's debt, and no one forced him to take out a mortgage. Q. It may not be such a small amount. You'll pay for 1 or 2 months, and then what? They will ask you to cover the entire mortgage. 3, paying for a stepsister's private education is generally. Education in the USA is expensive. Let's say that studying at a private school and university will cost at least $80,000. And if it is a prestigious educational institution, the amount may be many times more. And if you add to this a mortgage which can amount to hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars, it just doesn't make sense. The most the author could hope was his aunt, who really cared about him, but even that would not be his responsibility. What do you think? Write in the comments.